podcasts.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Hello and welcome to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio with me, Megan Cornwell. This is the show where we delve into a person's life, faith and ministry. It's brought to you in association with the UK's leading Christian magazine, Premier Christianity. If you would like a free sample copy of our latest issue, head to our website, premierchristianity.com/free sample. Today on The Profile, I'm speaking with Andy Hawthorne. Andy is a British author, evangelist and urban missionary who founded the Message Trust, a charity that reaches the most disadvantaged and disaffected young people in the country. He has spent over 2 decades shaping the organisation, and he's seen thousands come to faith as a result. In recognition of his services to young people, he was awarded the OBE in 2011. I caught up with Andy earlier this year at the Christian festival New Wine. Listen in. So Andy, you've been working in mission in a UK context for over 25 years. But tell me how it all began, how you became a Christian.
Okay, so I was brought up in a Christian family. My mum became a Christian when I was about 3, along with half the women on our street. It was like a mini revival in Hambleton Road in South Manchester. Old lady led all these young mums to the Lord. Shortly after, my dad came in as well. And so I was brought up in the Christian faith, but rebelled as a teenager. But all the way through my rejecting Christianity, my mum would be praying for us and all these ladies would be praying. And when I was 17 and my brother was 19, Simon, he was also in a lot of trouble with the police and drugs and all sorts of nonsense. But all the way through those rebellious years, my mum would buy myself and Simon a Christian book every Christmas, and we'd get all the things we wanted, and we'd always get the Christian book. And so when I'm 17, my mum and dad have now moved to Wales, and Simon and me are stayed in Manchester. And they probably moved to Wales to get away from us, actually. But anyway, my mum's praying, and Simon started going out with a girl called Leslie. Leslie had a cousin in Blackpool she went to visit, about 50 miles away, and they wandered in together to a second-hand bookshop. And this cousin had been aware of this fella called Arthur Blessett, who was an evangelist, coming to Blackpool. And so she said to Leslie, she saw a book on the side in the second-hand bookshop by Arthur Blessett, said, I'm going to buy that book for you, see what you think, for 5 pence. And it wasn't a Christian bookshop, just a regular secular bookshop. So Leslie, my brother's girlfriend, read this book and was impressed enough to give the book to her boyfriend, Simon. And Simon was like, oh, Leslie, you're trying to convert me like my mum or what? But he opened the book, and on the inside flap it said, to Simon, with love from Mum, Christmas 1974. So it's one of those amazing God things that we don't know to this day how the book got off our bookshelf in South Manchester, 50 miles away, into Blackpool, into his girlfriend's hands and back round to him. But when he opened that book, it was like, wow, this really is to Simon with love from God. And he read it. And driving down the road in his van, he just said, oh, Jesus, forgive me, I'm sorry, come into my life. And he was filled with the Spirit there in his van, completely proper road to Damascus conversion. And it was through Simon's witness that I started going to church again. He got full on fire for it. For about 6 months, I went to church every Sunday with Simon, and the rest of the week was drinking and fighting and partying. But after about 6 months, he gave his testimony in church, told about the book, my mum, the whole story, and I just knew I had to give my life to Jesus. So
how old were you?
17. So fully came through 1977, and clearly not been a perfect Christian, but definitely not looked back. And it was the most significant thing that ever happened in my life. And I actually feel that night, way back then, God gave me something of the heart of the evangelist. You know, what I love to do is tell people who don't know Jesus about Jesus. I was telling all my mates and going around the pubs in Cheadle where I lived, and saw a bunch of them become Christians. And the youth group I was involved in grew like crazy over a period, went from about 10 to 200 in these first years of being a Christian. Amazing days. And I wasn't the best evangelist around, but definitely that was my heart, right? And I tried to get into full-time Christian work a bunch of times, but nobody seemed to want to have me. So I ended up going into business with Simon, and we set up a fashion business. We made accessories and jackets, and then we bought big embroidery machines as the work grew, and so we had all these cool fashion accessories. And in the mid-80s, Lady Diana wore a pair of our braces. We used to make fashion braces for girls. And the next day it was like every girl in Britain had to have a pair. So we had millions of these braces on order. And so we went to the local job centre, employed lots of local lads from the estate, and they were a nightmare. You know, our factory was in inner city Manchester, really for no better reason than that's where we got the best grants. And we lived in the suburbs. I lived in a beautiful 400-year-old cottage. Used to drive in my BMW and get out as quick as I could, really. But suddenly I was confronted by their messy lives and their brokenness and generations of unemployment and addiction. And then the break-in started. So the word got out in Longsight, where our factory was, that there's all this cool fashion gear. And so we would be called out about 3 or 4 times a week with different break-ins, and it was chaos. But it was like, this can't be right. You know, these lads, they know nothing of Christ. And so we tried to find some churches in Longsight, and there were little struggling churches, but definitely no churches that could connect with these kids. And so it was really on the back of that myself and my brother Simon decided to arrogantly organise Manchester's biggest ever youth mission. We were at Harrogate, this is 1987 now. So we were at the Harrogate Fashion Fair displaying our wares, and we were just chatting about these lads, and somebody needs to do something. And by the end of the afternoon we were like, well, why don't we do something, and we'll book the biggest rock venue in Manchester for a week. We'll write to every church, we'll try and get hundreds of build-up programmes happening in the inner city. And drove back from the Harrogate Fashion Fair all excited, feeling like the wheels of the car were an inch off the ground, and you know, look out devil, here come the Hawthorne brothers. And then got home and I was like, you know, as if we could do this. We don't have the resources, we don't have the gifting, we don't have the connections. And I said, oh God, if you really want us to step out in faith like never before, would you speak to me through the Bible? And my set reading for that day was Isaiah 43, and particularly verses 18 to 21, which are verses we've not left in 32 years. It says, forget the former things, don't dwell in the past, see I'm doing a new thing. There'll be rivers in the desert and streams in the wasteland. It goes on to say, the wild animals will honour me, those I've formed to declare my praise. And that kind of, those scriptures are basically everything we want the message to be 32 years later. So that was all out of the business for the first 5 years.
And when you talk about letting go of the former things, is that about you yourself as well? Because I guess, you know, you describe yourself as having a nice car and a nice house. You know, did you have to let go of some of those things in order to do what you're doing now?
Well, yeah, 5 years later. So we had to downscale our lifestyle quite dramatically.
What was that like?
Well, I think it was harder for Michelle than it was for me, actually, my wife. And I remember, because what actually happened after we did the Message 88, this massive youth mission with 300 build-up events and thousands of kids and people coming to Christ. Then we did Message 89, and then we formed a worldwide Message Tribe, which was this band rap hip-hop outfit that I ended up fronting and never planned to be a rapper or dancer. It was just amazing. It's everything I wanted to do. And we got kind of popular even all over the world while I was still in the business. And so I was loving life, charging everywhere. And Michelle was at home with 2 kids. And I remember going to see our vicar and saying, I really feel this call into the message to full-time work now, set up the charity, leave the business behind, put all my energies. And he said, very wisely, it's more important that Michelle feels that call. And unless you're both in this together, it's never going to work, especially if it's going to affect your finances, affect where you live, affect, you know, all that stuff. And so Michelle was up for it.
So how did you get Michelle from that place of not being sure about it to being completely all in?
I mean, obviously lots of prayer, and she is a woman who hears the Lord, and lots of counsel, lots of support. But and I mean, you got to be careful when you say the Lord provided us with a lovely home, because you know there's millions of Christians, billions, who live in shacks around the world. But the way everything came together, you know, we had to sell our 400-year-old cottage. We thought we were going to be moving into a tiny 2 up, 2 down, and through a whole bunch of miraculous circumstances, you know, we had to downscale big time, but nothing like we imagined. And God just lined so many beautiful surprises. And I mean, when it's the only time in my life when I've really had to rely on the Lord, because even going from a businessman's overheads, you know, that journey, we've moved house, so we've got rid of a load of debt and a big mortgage, but we still got, you know, it takes a while. And there was a season when, you know, we were as poor as we've been. We weren't poor compared to many people who didn't know where the next meal was coming from. But there were occasions when we were like, wow, God, how are we going to buy the food this week? And full-on shops would, turn up on our doorstep and just crazy stuff. So we saw the Lord's amazing provision in those early days. And it's funny really, because I was, as I say, loving life. So I was doing schools work with a band all week, and then we'd go off around Europe doing these massive gigs and love it. And I remember saying to Michelle, wasn't it amazing those early days of the Worldwide Message Tribe? When we were just riding that wave and seeing thousands come to Christ and open doors. And she said, no, it was horrible. I was like, all right. Because she was at home with the two kids, and he said, I felt I couldn't tell you that. And sometimes I just wanted to leave even at 1 or 2 points, because it's just so hard. You're charging around the world with all these beautiful dancers and singing and rapping and doing these massive gigs, having a brilliant time, yeah? So I hope at that point, I said, well, that's not the way it's meant to be. Yeah. Even if you've got a massive call and you're like, you don't need your marriage to suffer or your relationships to suffer, because God can do more in 5 minutes than takes a lifetime of human effort. So we learned a bit, but it was a crazy time of God opening doors for us though.
Well, tell us a bit more about these miraculous ways that you've seen God move over the years, particularly in the lives of the young people you've been working with.
Well, we say, it's funny actually, I used to say we're a story-driven movement. In some ways we are. We celebrate our stories, and we're at New Wine at the moment, and one of our lads, Liam, just stood up and told his story this morning, a story of absolute brokenness and addiction and rejection and suicide and all that, suicide attempts. And now he's this beautiful man of God, and we've been privileged to disciple him and see him, make that journey. And what an honour that is. And it's like, sometimes I think if that's all we had, one Liam to show, it'd be worth it, because of course he was lost and hopeless, and now he's got heaven and he's got a future. But we see that we've got thousands of them. A couple of weeks ago, months ago, I was preaching in this church, in Hope City Church in Sheffield, and at the end of the service, 2 girls came up to me, and one was Natasha, and we journeyed with Natasha, massive roller coaster out of all sorts of drugs and brokenness and pain, and a huge roller coaster. She ended up in rehab, but 15 years later, she's now this woman of God, who's one of the leaders in their home for trafficked and vulnerable women. And it's worth it. Natasha, the youth leader in the church, a girl called Kylie, was in Harper Hay, reached to one of our team again, very broken, very damaged, and you would say, where's the potential in that girl? Well, if you can see her come to Christ and disciple and journey through all the roller coaster of that, she can go on to be this multiplying disciple, which is what we get excited about the message.
And of all the people that you've seen come to Christ, Andy, is there one particular story that really stays with you?
I think there's lots, but perhaps immediately the first story that might come to mind is a lad called Nick, who's one of our most fruitful evangelists, works in prisons and PRUs. I journeyed with Nick for probably 10 years, and he would actually, if I ever invited him to church, he would come. He was like on drugs, dealing drugs, against suicide attempts, lots of violence, lots of chaos. But we had a bit of a connection, and so he would come and he would meet me for coffees. And the amount of times I do these extended appeals at the end of my messages, and he never gave his life to Christ. Just the more he heard me preach, the worse he got. And then some Nigerian guy came to Manchester, and he gave his life to Jesus, and came to see me the next day and said, Andy, I'm sorry, I know it's all true. And he said, I need to be part of the Message family, and if you allow me to clean the toilets, I'll do it for nothing. That's what he said. And so I took a bit of a flyer on him and put it on our year program. We have that program called Message Academy, which is a discipleship program. And it was, again, a roller coaster. He was still doing a bit of weed on the side. His girlfriend, Andrea, left him as soon as she heard he'd become a Christian and ripped his Bible up, and there was all that going on. But then one of our girls came alongside Andrea and actually took her out to Uganda. She got saved then in Uganda, and just with all God was doing out there. Now, fast forward 10 years, Nick's this amazing evangelist who week in, week out, seeing healings and salvation in prison. She's leading that ministry in Uganda, which is like rescuing hundreds of kids and businesses. And I think of that couple, and I was best man at their wedding, and it was amazing. And I remember Nick coming around to my house at 11:30 at night at the birth of his second child, because
And I'm like, oh, you all right, mate? And he said, oh, I'm sorry, I know it's late, but I just had to see somebody. I'm so excited about little Nico, my son. And I know what it is to be a dad, because when Alexis, that was his daughter, was born, I was in and out of the delivery suite, high on drugs. All my old mates were hanging around outside, and I didn't know what it was to be a father, but I know what it is to be a father. And now to see Nick and Andrea bringing up these kids in the Lord and reaching like thousands of people, I mean, that's amazing, isn't it?
Your organisation, Andy, has got lots of different sort of sides to it. So you work with people in prison, you work with young people in schools, with deprived communities on urban estates. With people like Nick, for example, what were the initiatives that have been most successful in terms of helping those people come to Christ and stick with their Christian faith?
Well, I mean, when we first, so basically 92, then I left the business. My brother carried on the business, was the biggest backer for the first few years. And then, and all we had was this band, the Worldwide Message Tribe, and I was the evangelist, and we were going to schools. But about 5 years into the charity, we did a week in a place called Bench Hill, which was then like the most deprived ward in Britain, out of 34,000 wards. It was chaos, like drive-by shootings and drug dealing and all prostitutes hanging around. And we did this concert at the end. 700 kids turned up from Bench Hill area, and 100 made a commitment to Christ. And what's better, they all turned up for church. This little church of 20 people had these, they were like the wild animals from Isaiah 43, but formed to declare his praise. And but it was pretty chaotic, and we were so excited. This is our dream, the hardest to reach. But most of them fell away. We watched them like slip back, and how can a church of 20 people cope with that much chaos? And so it was then that we came up with the idea for Eden, which now Eden is Christians moving deliberately downwardly mobile, kind of following Jesus, who left a lovely place to came to an ugly place because of his great love, and moving. So, and we pragmatically moved a whole bunch of young adults into Bench Hill to start the first Eden team, and it was such a success that we then did the second one in Langworthy and Salford, and 72 Eden teams later we're still rolling them out at the rate of one a month, and over 700 people have made that massive step. Vast majority of them are volunteers. Each team of 12 has one full-time guy or girl. Sometimes it's a couple, but the volunteers, who often by vocation just live kind of anonymously, if you like, a bit like, Jesus talks about ministry in two ways. He said salt and yeast, where a little bit makes a big difference. A little bit of yeast makes the whole loaf rise, a little bit of salt flavours the whole stew. But he also talks about it like lamp on a stand, where you can light up a whole city, and city on a hill, great tree that all the birds of the air can sit in, i.e. you can't miss it. And I think it's the way we get that tension going is how we see communities transformed. Christians deliberately moving into prisons and deprived communities or whatever it is, but also unashamedly preaching the gospel. And we've tried to do that with, the Worldwide Message Tribe is no more, hallelujah. But we now have 8 other schools teams doing that same thing. But we also have these hundreds of workers who've moved to live in the most deprived communities, which is amazing.
And are you seeing people in those communities become Christians?
Yeah, big time. And we really look forward. Every 4 or 5 years, the government brings out what it calls the indices of deprivation. So, and it's come out this August actually, or September. And it's not every 5 years, but every 4 or 5 years they kind of recalibrate it all. So you'll be able to put your postcode in and find out of 34,000 wards exactly where you sit in terms of health, wealth, education, life expectancy, all the sort of key indices. And it's so exciting to look for all the Eden estates, the people where we've moved these people in, to see the way, because Bench Hill is no more the bottom of the barrel. The third Eden team was Harper Hay, which was then taken over or under whatever it would be, Bench Hill. But to see the way these estates have not just seen church grow, but communities transform. So yes, the gospel works, but we have to be very deliberate about taking it out. We have to be, confident. And a big part of my work now is trying to train and resource Christians to share their faith better.
Do you think that the UK church is doing enough to resource Christians to be effective evangelists?
Well, definitely not. Here's how I put it. I think we've got a fantastic HR department in the church. There'll be all sorts of beautiful ministry in the power of the Holy Spirit. at New Wine and all the festivals this summer. But actually, we haven't got a sales and marketing department, if you like. We haven't got the evangelists out there confident and boldly, and is it any wonder we're not growing that fast? Because when the evangelists are released, that's what happens. People come to Christ. That's what the gifting's there for. Now, we're all meant to do the work of the evangelist, but there is definitely the specific ministry gift, and in a lot of places it's forgotten or neglected. And even heard about a church that said, we don't get involved in the E word. Like we do social engagement, we do good works, but without the E word, we're never going to see society changed, because only God can change the human heart.
And Andy, what have you personally learned about God from 25 years in the frontline mission?
I've learned that He's faithful and He's for us, and that the gospel works like nothing else. So, it's 40 years, over 42 years ago, and God's never let me down. I've let Him down plenty of times, and that song we sang it this morning actually here at New Wine. You're never going to let me down. But I always sing it at the end of that song. I always sing, I never want to let you down. You're never going to let me down. That song we sing over and over, and that's great to know. That God's never, and I've learned that He never lets us down. Sometimes He'll take us to the absolute wire. And being a Christian is not a cop-out from the tough things of life, but it's a power to go through, undoubtedly. And I think about, the financial provision for the message, besides anything else, the finances. Now it's a multi-million pound operation, and I remember the first time we got £1,000 cheque, I nearly did a lap of honour off my mate Dave way back. Now we need, I know, something stupid like whatever, 6.5 million just for the UK, and then we've got all this international work, and how it comes in is just freaky.
Can you give me some examples?
Well, I remember one time, Mick Woodhead's here, who's a rector in Sheffield, a great friend of mine, but we were both over at a conference in Portugal. This is 2008, and finances were really tight. Payday was looming large. We'd always been climbing the mountain towards 23rd of the month when we got the salaries for over 100 people in the bank, and I'm sweating about finances. And Mick, I don't think Mick knew that, but he pulled me in front of all these big leaders. It was like a leaders conference. And he said, Andy, I believe God says to you, He's going to give you £1 million and 1 million opportunities. And I was like, oh, that'd be nice. I mean, people don't get £1 million checks, I'd certainly never had one. And then that was Thursday night in Portugal, flew back. Friday morning, I had a meeting with a business supporter of the message. And we met in McDonald's, which kind of gives you an idea of how skint we were at that time. And we had breakfast at McDonald's. He said, how did the conference go? I said, oh yeah, it was good. And we had this word from Mick Woodhead about £1 million, million opportunities. And the guy went white. And he said, that's amazing, because I've just sold my business and I told my wife I'm going to give the message £1 million. And he gave us £1 million, gift aided.
Wow.
The Chancellor gave us 250 grand as well. So it's just crazy. But I mean, how crazily God is that? And of course we've blown it all on mission now, but it's just so exciting. An exciting bit is not the £1 million. I mean, that's ridiculous that somebody would just give you that much money and say, there it is, no strings attached, use it as you see fit. But also the $1 million opportunities, that's the bit that really excites me. And I think that's the season we're in now with the message, the $1 million opportunities, all over the world. Crazy stuff's happening.
Yeah, you've got loads going on. You've just written this book about calling. How do you make sure that you're focused and what you're doing is focused and you're not getting distracted?
Well, that scripture, the touchstone scripture where it all starts, says, see, I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? And there's a bit of that, we have my job at the message is to, people say, if you've got a job description, say, well, yeah, it's 2 lines long. It's keep mission hot, keep prayer hot. That's basically my job description. If those 2 things, I keep my focus on that, in some ways everything else looks after itself. Mm-hmm. It's more complicated than that, but so the keep prayer hot thing is so important to me. So I'm not just testing the prayer temperature of the message, but personally, even though I'm like kind of guy who loves to do new things, wants to, loads of ideas, but I don't want my ideas, I want God's ideas. I want to perceive His ideas. And it's actually, it's weird that, the amount of times I've spoken, reflected on those scriptures, probably more than any other in the last 32 years. But I got fresh revelation a couple of weeks ago, because it's fascinating. In Isaiah 43, it says, see, I'm the Lord who brought you through the waters. I'm the Lord who led you out of the desert. I'm the Lord who did all these amazing things for you, Israel. It says all these things. Then it says, forget the former things. It's like the Lord says, remember the former things, then forget the former things, because see, I'm doing a new thing. Do you get me? It's like we rejoice in all that's happened so far with the message, but we know the best is yet to come. You know, it's always one degree of glory, but we're only going to discover that if we seek him, if we perceive it. So every day we pray at the message. We have seasons of prayer and fasting. We're just building a night and day prayer house at the back of the message. We have full days when, you know, everybody has to down tools, and I'm a real kind of, this is non-negotiable, there's no meeting, and we spend the whole day in prayer and worship and seeking him. And I think it's been the best decision we've made, just to keep prayer hot, and we still made mistakes, but a lot less than we would have done if we hadn't been praying like that.
And does that feed into your own personal faith life and your own personal prayer life?
Well, two things: constantly seeking God. Three things: constantly seeking God in prayer, being in his word a lot. You know, it's not just my ideas. God will never contradict his word. But also surrounding myself with good people. Just this morning, Sam Ward, who's head of ministry at the message and a mate of mine, but he's overseas, I just like, just to have people like that around me who are, tell it as it is, I can trust, but I've got my back. You know, that really, really helps you stay on the straight and narrow as well.
That brings us to the end of part 1 of today's show. But join us again to hear more from Andy Hawthorne right after this.
Premier Christianity magazine. In this month's issue,
we give you a rare glimpse inside China's underground church as Paul Hattaway gives us the lowdown on what's been called the greatest revival in history. His special report reveals how the nation's 100 million Christians are thriving and seeing many miracles and salvations despite serious persecution. Plus, find out why Benny Hinn has renounced the prosperity gospel, get equipped to help those suffering with mental ill health, and be inspired by the Christians who are proving you're never too old to go on mission.
for your free copy, visit premierchristianity.com/free sample. The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Where faith comes to life.
Welcome back to The Profile, here on Premier Christian Radio with me, Megan Cornwell, Deputy Editor of Premier Christianity magazine. That's the monthly magazine that sponsors this show. If you would like a free sample copy of our latest issue, just go to premierchristianity.com/free sample. In part 2 of my interview with Andy Hawthorne, I found out the most challenging aspects of his ministry to young people and what he wishes he knew 20 years ago when he was starting the Message Trust. Let's rejoin my interview with Andy Hawthorne. Listen in. What about some of the challenges that you've found in urban mission over the years? Tell me about some of the worst days of your ministry.
Yeah, I think the obviously we've had a few, but and you know, all kinds of opposition and misunderstanding and weirdness. The hardest thing by far is when you invest in somebody and you see them turn their life around, see them get set free from drugs, or see them, you know, and then something happens in their life, they get in a difficult relationship, or something happens in their family, all the rubbish kicks back in. That is the hardest thing. We've got a few of them at the moment, you know, people who are just like our trophies, and God's never finished, and very often he'll bring those people back. But just to see people who have made so many strides and Satan's got right back in and taken them, it would appear, back to the start. And drugs is like that particularly, and you know, just drugs or sometimes drink for alcoholics is just a nightmare. So that's really hard, and in some ways we want to say soft-hearted, always ready for God's grace to kick in, but you do need to develop a bit of a thick skin. In some ways we can't disciple people, we can only cooperate with God. He's the great disciple. We can have all the programs, all the prayer, but sometimes people have got free will and will make monumentally stupid decisions.
How do you make the decision, you've only got a certain amount of resources, how do you decide enough's enough for somebody? We've poured resources into them, we've helped them.
Yeah.
How do you discern whether they're going to turn back, walk with God, or whether it's just time to walk away?
I don't think we ever walk away, and especially with Eden, we can't walk away because they tend to live around the corner or next door or in the community. That's the whole thing. So we never walk away, but we also have businesses. We have 9 businesses now where we employ ex-offenders and people out of rehab, and the vast majority of them have come out of lives of addiction. So if there is a time when we say, if this behaviour continues, we can't be paying your salary, you can't be working in this business, and so that's when we would always go further than most employees, and we've got a bunch of people now, perhaps other businesses would have sacked different, but there is a line, and there's a team around that. It's not just, unfortunately, doesn't stand with me, but often the buck stops with me, and that is a hard thing as well. Loneliness of leadership. I have to decide where, okay, enough is enough, and we can't be paying this person to take the mickey, but that's really difficult.
You work in a particularly deprived area of Manchester. We've talked a little bit about this before in terms of your family life, but was it difficult bringing up your children in that kind of context?
Well, to be honest, right now I don't actually. My kids are grown up and flown the nest, if you like, so I don't. Eden teams who live in deprived communities, their kids generally flourish. Their kids go to the local schools, they grow in the local, and they flourish, and it feels like maybe this is going to be part of the sacrifice. It's very, very rare we hear Eden parents say, it's been bad for my kids. If you're bringing them up in the church, if you're praying for them, if often these are multicultural, vibey, and transformations coming in, kids are seeing God do the miraculous. So I think the best thing you can do is get your family on a mission. The best thing, I did was, I think, take my kids out when they were very little to see the poorest of the poor, but also the poorest UK communities, and see God move in that context. Sometimes we protect our kids. Remember when we've done these big, social action and proclamation missions. A lot of the parents in the south, I think, thought they were going to come to Manchester, and everyone had, flat caps and guns. And how can I let little Tarquin loose on Manchester? It'll be a disaster. But it's not like that at all.
You once said, Andy, that you were frustrated that your employees weren't from the marginalised backgrounds of the people that your charity reaches. Do you feel that way when you look at the church?
Oh, well, that is definitely not the case. That was about 10 years ago I said that. I was kind of looking around the room, the 100 staff, thinking, wow, we're all pretty middle class and nice, but we've all got a heart for the poor, and a lot of us are living in deprived communities, and we're working in prisons and all the time. But that is definitely not the case now. And that was a deliberate decision that we made, that we needed to set up these businesses to try and disciple people and become part of our community and buy lots of houses within walking distance of our factory and our units. And so, yeah, that is not the case. But is the church far too middle class? Yes. And is the church like there's a ghetto and it's in the wrong places? I heard that I don't know whether this is a bit of an old stat, but I remember Roy Crown, I think it was, used to say, 80% of Christians live alongside 20% of people, and 20% of Christians live alongside 80% of people. Well, that's crackers, isn't it? Where the real need is where we need to be. And you can't get away from the fact that there's never been a major move of God that didn't start on the margins, didn't start amongst deprived communities, and then spill up right the way back to the Master. Jesus spent so much time with the poor and the marginalised and the broken.
And Andy, you're about to turn 60. How do you keep clued up about Generation Z and millennials when you're kind of well past that age yourself?
Yeah. Well, part of the reason I'm able to do it in some senses is because the average age of the staff at Message is 26. So we are just full. So I'm surrounded by millennials. We have
hundreds of millennials involved with the message. But part of the reason is they do, I don't. They get it in a way that I don't. So we deliberately, and I am definitely the old man of the organisation. And in some ways, my job now is to release others and empower others. And I'm going to, you're not going to stop me preaching. You're not going to stop me getting involved in mission. But I feel this next season is a lot about growing fruit on other people's trees. So I make sure I employ people who understand this culture and understand reaching millennials and what that looks like.
And you have won awards for being one of the best leaders at a not-for-profit organisation. You've won that twice, 2 years running. The Sunday Times Best Not-for-Profit category. What do you think is the key to great leadership?
Well, that's a joke, isn't it? Because I'm a guy with 1 O-level in woodwork, and I was at this, the big glitzy awards ceremony in London 2 years running, and alongside all these major, big secular charities who've got MBAs and all that, and I did win, which was amazing. So I think the hand of God being on your life, God helps you if you really press into leadership. But I think what really touches people's heart, what is passion. It's the passionate people that change the world. Wherever I go, people say to me, "You're a passionate guy," and I'm like, "Am I? I'm just me." No, you're really passionate. And in some ways, passion can take you all the way. Jesus said, if you've got a good and a noble heart, and you keep going to the end, if you can keep your passion going to the end, the people I have the most respect for. I'm friends with George Verver and Lewis Palau, these guys in their 80s now, and they've kept that passion. And I want to be there. I don't want to fizzle out. I want to go out with a bang.
Running the race.
Yeah, running the
right
race with passion. So I think passion and actually, was it Ronald Reagan said, there's no end to what can be achieved if you don't mind who gets the credit. And I'm trying hard to live that. So I celebrate that Sam Ward is doing the Bible readings at New Wine, and a whole bunch of our guys have got higher profile than me at some of the summer festivals. That's amazing.
And talking about keeping the passion, how do you keep your teams motivated day in, day out to share the gospel, spread the gospel, particularly when they're facing resistance and hostility?
Well, we have a whole, there's an HR department that's looking after welfare and training and resourcing, but there is this passionate prayer life and the stories that we share. When we come together, I'll make sure we virtually never, daily, we will hear a good news story of someone whose life's been changed by the message. And because it's been said, what you celebrate, you cultivate. So I want to cultivate passion. I want to cultivate passion for the poor and the marginalised and the broken. And if I'm going to do that, I celebrate that. So whenever I see that, I put that on the stand. Come on, people, this is worth it. And at the moment, we're in this slightly crazy season where there's around 40 nations around the world wanting to do message stuff, wanting to partner with us, and how we facilitate that. But we celebrate that it's slightly out of control. And there's probably nations around the world using our resources and replicating what we're doing who don't even know Andy Hawthorne is. But that's cool. And that's got to be good.
And how do you make sure that your teams don't suffer from burnout and suffer from trauma themselves, particularly the employees that are on the front line dealing with some people that are really in need? Do you have things in place to help?
Yeah, well, obviously. So we always ask teams to look at two horizons. Just look at your local context. Bury yourself in your deprived community or your prison or the area of work you're looking at, working in your business, trying to disciple people in that context. But also look at the bigger horizon. So the bigger horizon of regional. So we have lots of regional training, regional support, regional encouragement and sharing good practice, but patching each other up and being there for each other. So, I think that really helps. You tend to find the people who work in the inner city, beautiful hearted people, but who do suffer burnout, tend to be the people who just go in on their own, one couple. If you go in as a team, we often try and find, a bunch of houses down streets that juxtapose each other, So there's a community thing going on and lots of support at the local level, support at the bigger level, and lots of training, lots of encouragement, lots of prayer, lots of worship, lots of
escape valves, you know. But we still do find, you know, our beautiful Christian teams sometimes suffer from all kinds of mental health challenges, and it is not easy, but it's worth it.
We're seeing at the moment in the UK cases of street preachers being arrested, doctors and nurses losing their jobs for sharing their faith, and even campaigns against faith schools. Are you finding the job of sharing the gospel getting hard? Is it getting harder?
Well, it's really, I keep expecting it to. But you know, when we first started, actually 1992, when we set the charity up, we called it Message to Schools, because that's all we were. It was Message to Schools. It was like, we'd done these events, the Message, and then the Message Trust was all about the worldwide message tribe going in schools. And we are definitely have more schools inviting us in than ever. So more schools want, and our teams are full on with the faith, hiding nothing. So we'll be in well over 200 schools next year by invitation, and because they love it, and we tie it in with the national curriculum. We do it. Of course, it is rappers and DJs and breakdancers and all these cool guys going in, and the kids absolutely love it. So sometimes I think that we are our own worst enemies. You know, we go in breathing fire rather than with the grace of God, and we go in insensitive to the situation we're in. Now, if you go out of school hours, we will fully preach the gospel and bring an invitation. In school, it's done very much as a discussion. You ask us questions, and inevitably they ask all the questions you want to ask. And we say, well, the Bible says, and this is what Christians believe, this is what we believe. But it's always done in an educational context. So on that basis, schools are more open than ever. More schools want us in, and we are like, our biggest problem is how do we find the teams to fill all the opportunities we've got. Now, long may that continue. And it's just such a joy for me that's, you know, when we started as Message to Schools, that's happening. I had like 5 times in a very short space of time, different amazing Christian leaders like prophesy over me. You're going to see an amazing season of open doors. God's going to open doors, and it's happening.
And talking about the future now, Andy, the Message has joined with the Church of England, the Evangelical Alliance and others for an evangelism campaign called Advance 2020. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. And I feel in some ways, if there's one thing, I mean, I'm excited about a lot of what's going on, but if there's one thing I'm really excited about, it's Advance. What actually happened was, there's a guy, a Ugandan pastor who's become a great friend, came over, and he said he lives in Kampala, and he said, Andy, I'm coming to the UK, I need to share with your troops. So I gathered everybody, and this John Bunjo, he was one of the guys who said, tremendous season of open doors. And Isaiah 60, he said, the Lord says, arise, shine, for your light's coming. And he said, and you need to get away and seek the Lord, Andy. And I'm like, looking at my diary thinking, I haven't got much time to seek the Lord. And but I managed to find a couple of days for a retreat, and I went to the Lake District, and wow, God just spoke to me out of Isaiah 60. In fact, he did all this Isaiah 60 stuff. I put a CD, a teaching CD, I didn't know what it was about, all the way down, all on Isaiah 60. And then I got to my bedroom after walking around the hills in the Lake District, put my Bible on the bed. I was going to read Romans, and I put it down, it fell open on Isaiah 60. I had this incredible time with the Lord, where a whole bunch of things, and in there it says that the least will become 1,000, the smallest a mighty nation. You know, you're going to see some of these people from the margins actually reaching a mighty nation. That's millions, isn't it? And but it also says, assemble my people, says the Lord. And it says the gates will be open and stay open day and night, and all this stuff. And during that time in the Lake District, I felt 2 things. First thing was, we need to go big again. Book some big venues, get in more schools, preach the gospel boldly. And so on the back of that, we've started our bit of Advance 2020. It's called the Higher Tour, which is hundreds of thousands of kids that are going to hear the gospel through that in the next year. But I also felt the Lord say, you're not meant to be the frontline evangelist anymore. You know, for 25 years or whatever it was, I'd been the main guy that would wheel out for all the big gigs, and I love that, of course. But no, you're meant to invest in others. And so when I got back, I gathered 12 guys. Said, let's do something called Advance, where we meet monthly, we're dead accountable, we try and WhatsApp daily to each other, encourage one another, and we look at what kind of gospel we preach and what kind of life do we live to be really fruitful evangelists. And so I gathered these 12. This is like about 3.5, 4 years ago. And I said, within 12 months, I want you to be thinking you would form a similar group, people around you that you can invest in. Well, it's been amazing. So there's over 700 now people in these groups, more than 70 of these groups. There's girls' groups, kept them single sex because we wanted a high level of accountability. And in the last couple of months, we've started to see all this global explosion. So particularly with Lewis Palau Association coming alongside and translating it into all kinds of languages and leading the charge across America and South America and Africa, and just taking on guys in India to do it, and Pakistan, and it's just really kicking off. So it's training evangelists in an accountable, mentoring way. So that's part of it. But for 2020, we're saying to lots of ministries, will you train evangelists, but will you also go for broke? Will you, we're doing the Higher Tour, which is hundreds of thousands of young people. We're saying to all these other ministries, would you think about coordinating and cheering each other on and sowing loads and loads of seed? And if we're trained, if we're prayed up, maybe God will give us a harvest. So we're going for it, and as I say, there's about 100 ministries now involved. We've got a big launch. It's not a conference, it's a commissioning day on the 12th of October at the Bethel Convention Centre. And so we're hoping to gather 1,500 people who have a heart for evangelism and share some amazing stories of what's going to happen in 2020. So advance2020.org is where you can find loads of free resources, and it's so not a control thing. If you want to form a group with your mates to be accountable about how do we reach our friends, let's sharpen each other, let's get better, and that's Advance, and it's dead exciting.
And in terms of it being in 2020, is that a coincidence? Or, I mean, I'm talking about, thinking about the political climate at the moment and thinking about what 2020 might hold in terms of everything that's happening with Brexit. Do you think it's a coincidence that you're planning to do it now?
Well, what do they say? It's a God incidence. So that's probably, I mean, we've only done it because it just makes sense. It's, 2020, we've had all these prophetic words, it's 2020 vision and all this stuff. I think it's just a year. But it is a year where God seems to be lining an awful lot of stuff up in the UK, okay? Prayer movements, and people have a heart for mission, and it could be the year when more people hear the good news face to face than any time in my Christian life. If all the stuff I know about comes off, that all the plans. So could be really, really exciting. So we're certainly going for it, and who knows? Who knows what the climate's going to be like in 12 months' time? Who knows what's going to happen? But whatever happens, we know the gospel works, and it's the answer, however good or bad society goes.
And so you clearly think that proclamation evangelism isn't over.
Big time.
Hasn't had its day.
So we've got prayer and proclamation in some ways. Obviously we have to care for the poor, that's a gospel imperative, but without the good, we have a gospel that must be heard. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So you believe in your heart, you confess with your mouth you're saved. You can't get away from it. And if we do, this church is going to shrivel and die, and we're going to just do the government's job for them on a cheap. Don't take the gospel away from us. It's all we've got.
And finally, Andy, if you could do it all again, what would you say to a young Andy Hawthorne right at the beginning of starting the message? What do you wish you knew then that you know now?
Well, you've heard me say I wish I was a bit more thoughtful to my wife in the early days. I do wish I'd spent more time in the Bible and in prayer. More time reading the Bible for me. Because I'm a preacher, I'm always reading the Bible for others. Here's 3 points to, nail it home in this setting, and they need to hear that. But the Bible's really beautiful when it reads you and you read it. So I wish I'd built more time, and I'm trying to do that. So more time reading the Bible for me, more time in prayer, and more time with my mates. I am a driven man. I'm a man with passion and a visionary. I love to think I'm apostolic, grow stuff. But the message, the great joy, is mates on a mission. We want to be good friends, don't we? Jesus is first and foremost our friends. I'm no longer calling you servants, I'm calling you friends, said Jesus. I want to be good mates. So those are the sort of things I'd work at: my relationship with God and my relationship with my mates, and primarily, my relationship with my wife. Reflecting on that, I could have done all those things better, but still God's kind, and I've got a brilliant marriage and a brilliant ministry, and God's amazing.
Well, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you, Andy. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for today. But you can check out more profile interviews in Premier Christianity magazine, the publication that sponsors this show. From the Archbishop of Canterbury to the author Francine Rivers, from the TV presenter Simon Thomas to evangelist Jackie Pullinger, we interview the biggest names in the Christian world. For your free sample copy of the magazine, go to premierchristianity.com/free sample. Otherwise, see you same time, same place next week on The Profile.